Hi everyone, my name's Stephanie Hopper and I'm the Director of Development Solutions at Capfinity, joined by my co-host Celine Floyd. Celine will introduce herself very shortly. A few words on Capfinity. We are a global business based in Birmingham, London, Dublin, various US locations and Sydney, and we've been helping organisations to find candidates, develop employees and transform their businesses around our USP of strengths-based assessment and development for over 16 years. Celine and I both work on Altitude, Capfinity's leadership proposition. It's a market-leading method of assessing and developing your leaders through a strengths lens. Celine, would you like to say hi?
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, hi everybody. Delighted to be back again. Celine Floyd, the Director of Leadership Assessment at Capfinity. As I say, really happy to be here again this week. We've got a really fascinating topic this week in our Lead Strong series. We're looking at happiness and engagement at work, which is joyful. And we are joined by two wonderful guests, Nic and Kerri. Thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if you could just tell the audience a little bit about yourselves. So we'll go to Kerri first. Hi, Kerri.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Celine. Hi to everyone out there. My name's Kerri O'Neill. I'm the People and Transformation Director at Ofcom, which is the UK's communication regulator. And really happy to be talking about this today. It's a topic that's, I think, acted as a bit of a red thread through my 15-year career in HR. And so, yeah, fascinated to get stuck into the discussion.
Thank you, Kerri. So happy to have you. Nic, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Nic. I'm CEO and founder of Friday Pulse. Actually, I've known the founder of Capfinity, Alex, for about 20 years, I think now. I'm a happiness statistician, and Friday Pulse looks at why happiness is actually your best people KPI in a business. It's actually the best indicator things are going well or not in organizations.
Wonderful.
We couldn't have better guests for the topic, I think.
I know. Look at this. It's almost like we thought it through.
No pressure here.
So I guess organisations for years have talked about employee engagement, and there was data that told them there was an inextricable link between employee engagement and performance. And I guess if you ask most leaders globally, it's kind of high up their to-do list, probably in most of their scorecards. First of all, hypothesizing why results look like they do, and then deciding on what actions they can take off the back of those results. I think those actions are often gestures in my view, but hoping that they might have some influence on future surveys or metrics. But I think for most employees, this whole concept is quite impersonal or distant. It feels quite intangible, and it's like a process that works for an organisation, a bit like performance management, but doesn't necessarily work for the employee. And I think what's interesting is that leaders and organisations are beginning to ask themselves, what are the real drivers of engagement and where does well-being fit into that? And in fact, this year, during some research we did earlier in the year, where we talked to 25 talent leaders across a range of industries, when we asked them, with everything that's going on, and this was as they were kind of approaching hybrid, what do you think your C-suite leaders should be thinking about and focusing on in the coming months? Universally, everybody said people's well-being. And I guess, we're now seeing an argument being made that we should really be turning our attention to happiness, because obviously that is very closely linked to well-being and part of the whole case for well-being, rather than employee engagement. And so, what can we do, I guess, to get organisations, the leaders within organisations, on board with this idea? So that leads us into our questions we've got today. And where I'd love to start is with this first one, which is, I guess, how can happiness at work be seen as a pathway to success for organisations, rather than almost a sort of accidental positive outcome of a successful workplace? Let me go to Nic, Mr. Happiness, first of all.
I think happiness is often misunderstood as just a personal experience. It's very interpersonal, and it's registered in the individual. And it's very energetic. So if we're really thinking about energizing and motivating people at work, then happiness is a much better word to talk about. If you can't ask someone how's their well-being been this week, in fact, you can't even ask them how engaged they are, because they don't really understand the top of that scale. Whereas we do really understand when we're happy or not. It's a very, very internal signalness that things are going well. So in that sense, as a statistician, I know I can get more robust data when I ask people how happy they are rather than how their well-being is. And I also know it's much closer linked to their actions. You know, our emotions do exactly what they say. They move us. And actually, when we have positive emotions, we move in a positive direction. When we have negative ones, we move away from things. So it's very, very linked to our intricate biology as humans. And it's very, very linked to performance, creativity, and of course, whether people stay or not. So in that sense, you know, I think happiness is a much better KPI for a business to track than engagement. It's very dynamic, it's very real time. But when we've got a situation like we had the last year, things have been so up and down. A stat like happiness, weekly happiness, can really pick that up, whereas annual engagement just misses it all. So that's really what I'm passionate about.
And what do you think, Nick, we need to do to really get leaders to believe that and to make this sort of shift towards that more regular pulse check and really feeling happiness is going to give them the answer they need?
Well, it's a good bad signal for them, so they can see immediately when things are going wrong in teams. I think leaders tend to be thinking about how can I stop things going wrong. That's where their attention is a lot, so it gives them that. But then also it builds trust in a team. You know, if you like working with your colleagues, you trust them, you do things, you're able to bounce ideas, you're able to deal with setbacks better, failures better. So there's just so many goodies in there. But we have to get past some of the, you know, the language we use around happiness. We don't have to think about it as happy clappy. Don't have to think about it as just sort of, you know, mucking around. You know, things like curiosity, inspiration, enthusiasm are all in there. And these are things that we want in employees. So there's something about language, and there's something, I think measurement, I mean, I'm a measurement guy, so that's always my strategy. But if we create measures and you see how useful are, and when they create predictive indicators, so often indicators in business are what we call lagging indicators. They say what happened, so who left, you know, who didn't turn up for work. Whereas this is an indicator of how people are right now, and it predicts their future behavior. So in that sense, I think it's really, really valuable. I mean, that's what we do at Friday Pulse, is try and make the case for that, why you need a happiness KPI, what are the ways to build that. But it is an ask for leaders, because you're basically saying to them, you know, trust that your employees, if they're happy, they work harder, and that is what happens. But it feels counterintuitive. You feel like they're going to be slacking off if they're happy. They're not. Actually, they're engaged and they're happy, and it's more engaging than engagement, happiness.
Love it, love it. And what about you, Kerri? What do you think in terms of how we can make happiness that sort of pathway to success, rather than just an accident that happens if we're lucky?
I think it's such a great question, and it's so well timed with well-being. I think just being a boardroom topic in a way that hasn't been there so consistently. We started in Ofcom to ask people about happiness for the first time in January this year, and I think, and there is still a little bit of time to see that as a true business metric, if that makes sense. And it's not just leaders who can often have a skepticism around it as a business metrics, colleagues themselves. And but I think, you know, the simplicity of it, its holistic nature, as Nick described there, you know, what is under the skin of when you are happy is so much more telling of a person and of an organization. I mean, quite often we ask people if they're happy with something. And I've noticed that, you know, particularly during the pandemic, people could be happy with working at Ofcom, happy with their line manager, but they themselves are not actually happy, if that makes sense, because of what may be happening around them. And so I think unpacking happiness and how the best way to measure it, what the best way is to measure it, and, you know, how do we gauge that in an organization is going to be a really important step. I think as a professional industry, we never landed on a consistent view of employee engagement, for example. You know, the survey companies, Gallup being one of them, got out there really early with their definition, their questions of that. And we never sort of ever seemed to settle as a community on what were good measures of engagement. And I worry that we might do the same with something like happiness, which I definitely think is a much better human measure of people in business, in companies. But I worry that it might suffer the same fate of something like employee engagement, where it ends up becoming sort of undistinct or not clear, and sort of and so kind of curious about how we would take this forward, Nick, and how we settle on some of these challenges as we move forward.
I mean, I've got quite strong opinions as a statistician about how we do this. And, you know, I worked for 10 years in government policy in the 2000s around how government should measure well-being. And, you know, it was the time of Blair and then Cameron when well-being was really hot. And the Office of National Statistics now do measure well-being nationally, which is good. And it does start to influence policy just at the margins. Some other things seem to have dominated our attention more than well-being over the last 5 years for some reasons. Anyway, when I left, I really wanted to do something a bit different because I want to do something more dynamic. So we created something called the dynamic model of well-being right back in 2008. And I suddenly realized about 5 years ago that we're still measuring it statically. And so although we were saying well-being was dynamic, we're still doing snapshots. And so then I thought, well, we could measure it dynamically. You know, we have the technology now to do that. So at Friday Pulse, we call Friday Pulse because on Friday we ask people how their week was. And then you get a very fluid indicator that goes up and down. And I'm not agnostic to what drives happiness. I kind of know what my stats say, but in many ways, the main thing is understanding you've got an outcome indicator, and it's a very clear outcome indicator. And then you look at what drives that. And some of that is process and some of it is other stuff. But if you've got that distinction, you can start to do it. And with engagement, they never did that. Like Gallup have Q12, the 12 questions, they're basically all drivers of some supposed construct of engagement, which no one knows exactly what it is. If you ask someone how engaged they are, they can't really answer that question. Whereas you can ask them how happy they are. So we've got a very clear outcome measure. And if you ask them repeatedly, it respects the fact that respondents are going to have good and bad weeks. We all have good and bad weeks. In fact, you have 3 moods in a morning, so you could get really fluid about it. But week is a really good sprint. It's called episodal measurement. Look back at the end of the week. How was your week? And then, you know, next week can be different again. And also it gives the opportunity for team leaders, because this is a event about leadership, to actually have that data on a weekly basis. How happy were their team last week? What went well for them? What didn't go well for them? How can we fix what wasn't going well? How can we build on what was going well? And you create momentum, because work is so dynamic, so fluid. I mean, last year was particularly so, but, you know, it always is. And so you're basically, and one of the things with happiness is it's closely related to resilience, in the sense that if you have the capacity to feel good, you can deal with setbacks better. And we see that in our data. You know, we see teams dip and then come back quickly if they've been solid. If they hadn't been solid, they dip and stay down. And that shape of the curve becomes resilient. So I'm very, very passionate about weekly measure, because it gives you the right. But then you have to create a whole culture in a business, and this is not easy. You have to create a whole culture in a business where people want to respond honestly every week. And then that is where the challenge comes, but it's also where the magic is. So, you know, you have to work at it like everything else.
I love this. There's so much that you both are sharing already that I'm just loving. The idea that we have 3 moods before in the morning, I love. I mean, my toddler, I think he has about 30. So, you know, the fact that we're changing all the time. The other thing that really resonated with me was when you were talking about, you know, happiness and the language that we use. And we're seeing that a little bit with the idea of leadership strengths, you know, and strengths at the leadership level, and that there is this risk that, you know, something that has connotations of being kind of nebulous or kind of pink, fluffy, for want of any other descriptions, you kind of lose the idea that there is this really strong commercial link with what you're looking at. So, you know, great to hear that these, you know, this kind of language is being more synonymous with commercial impacts. And the other thing, just Kerri, that you were saying around, you know, looking holistically, I've always struggled with this idea of being able to split someone between themselves at work or not at work, and how you're feeling in an environment being distinct from how you feel everywhere else that you are in the day. So, yeah, really wonderful. Thank you. I read a quote a few weeks back, which was by the CEO of a former CEO of a large FMCG, who said that to win in the marketplace, you need to first win in the workplace. And I love that. For me, it was synonymous with the piece that Richard Branson is famous for. And he said, "Oh, in order to like client isn't king. It's your employee. Put your employee first, and then they'll look after the clients themselves." This whole idea of if you look after your people, that is how you're going to be winning commercially. So if we look at this through a leader's kind of lens, as an individual leader, really interested in both of your thoughts in what leaders can do to make sure that they are winning in the workplace, and that they're creating teams that are winning. So Kerri, I'll come to you first in this instance. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's been so clear, hasn't it, that workplaces that win for themselves will win. I think there's often a short period of time where you can have commercial success and have an unhappy workforce, and there's been sort of recent quite high profile examples of that with Brewdog and others, where that's obviously in front, but it's not a sustainable path to commercial success. And I think we've seen that time and time again. I think that case is very well proven now. The sort of litmus test for me was around 5 years ago. We had investors talking to when I was working at Aviva, talking increasingly to the chief people officer when they're looking at stocks, when they're looking at their and that to me was a significant shift for business. And so, and with the recent pandemic, it's also really brought the chief people officer role into the heart of the boardroom, into the running of the business. And it's sort of well described now that the global financial crisis was the era of the CFO, and the pandemic has been now the era of the CPO. And I really think that this is an opportunity now for us to grasp. So people have kept businesses going, their ingenuity, their resilience. People have tested themselves to the max in a whole different array of business circumstances. We saw Ofcom did some fantastic research that got released a couple of weeks ago that says, millions of us have learned languages whilst they've been furloughed. Millions of us have connected in different ways, and I think what that whole person is what we buy when we give someone a salary. And I think we need that to me is what leadership now is all about. It is about the whole person, and that is then a ask of management communities who really just ever focus maybe on the task-based element of management. The scheduling and who's doing what and driving up that performance, and conveniently forgetting that there is a whole other person here potentially. There's a whole other array of things that are going on, and we've seen people penalized for being going through difficult circumstances. We've hearing more and more about how people with disabilities, women in the menopause, where they've had needing something different from their workplace, being forced out in essence, because they need something different from their employer, and they're not there to give it for them. I mean, I think well-being, making it easy for leaders to think about well-being and happiness is a really key part of this. And I think, Nic, that's what you were speaking to a little bit in the end of your last answer, because it is daunting, I think, to as a leader to think, oh, have I really got to get into their personal life now? Have I got to really sort of start to talk about topics? And so how can we make it easy for your whole self to be part of the management lexicon that we've got used to? And we also sort of what we've been thinking about in Ofcom is how do people thrive, and that's been our huge programs throughout the pandemic. We started it before, it was Thrive at Ofcom, then we pivoted it to be Thrive at Home. now it'll probably be thrive anywhere. But you know, that whole self piece has been really welcome. It was really useful during the pandemic. It'll be a core part, and helping managers get into a topic that they feel quite daunted by, I think is the task of the people function. And the CPO role, I think, is very well positioned now to do that.
I love that. I love that, especially this idea of making it easy. And I guess it's making it easy for the leader stroke manager, but also for the individual, right? Normalizing that conversation for both parties. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Kerri. It sounds like there's some really amazing work happening there. Nick, anything in addition from you?
Yeah, just picking up on it really. I mean, I really agree with you, Kerri. I think the heart of it, it's reciprocity that's at the heart of this relationship between the employer and the employee. So people used to call it the psychological contract some time ago, but basically, you know, when people feel valued, they add value. You know, when they feel cared about, they care about your employees. It's a reciprocal relationship. And so, you know, if you want your employees to look after your customers, look after your employees. I mean, I'm so with that really as an idea. And I think it is about making it easy part of the culture that you do that. And you have to start little with that, because there's levels of this. I mean, from all my data, I know that people's experience of work is very proximal. It's very related to who they work most with, to their line manager, to the people they work with. And so, you know, the senior leader is never going to be able to know everybody in a large organization, but the line manager, you know, absolutely, or supervisor or whatever they are called these days. But, you know, basically, you know, they need to know about their team and have that there, you know, and so that is about systemizing the way that feedback's done. So, you know, you're not going to know everything about everybody, but your line manager should know about their team, and obviously their manager should know about their reports. And I think it's really creating that friendly, interested, caring environment. And if people are asked, you know, I'm going to go back to every week because I think it does matter, it's repeated. They're asked every week, how do you feel? They feel cared about. And that is really, really important. If you take the answers seriously, if you're just going to ask them and then put it in some spreadsheet, forget it. You've done more harm than good with that, because you've opened up something and then you've not done anything with it. You do have to follow up with it. This is a process about doing it, and it's a process that builds. But it's based on reciprocity, that, you know, and that's just like, you know, we're very relational beings as humans. It's why we come together to work together. We don't all work on our own. It's what we've missed over the last year. We've missed seeing and being with people. That doesn't mean to say we don't want to work at home sometimes. Probably we do. But it also means that, you know, we want to see people again. So it's a complex space, but in some ways it's actually really, really simple. It's just asking people, caring about the answer, listening. You know, comms shouldn't be one way. It needs to be a conversation. And, you know, it's those sort of things that really start making the big difference.
Nick, I was interested in what you said a few minutes ago about, you know, the cultural change that's needed to ensure that people feel comfortable being open and honest in answering, you know, a regular question about how they're feeling. And I wondered what you've seen work well in terms, because you grinned and you said that's where the magic happens. And I wondered where you've seen that shift and what has been done in those organizations to create that shift, because it's not an overnight thing. It's a long-term thing, I would imagine.
Well, you know, with the best will in the world, quite a lot of managers, people managers, are promoted for their technical or length of service rather than their people skills. And so when you're creating something, I think you need to know that you actually want to support these people. They want to be better people managers. They just don't, maybe it's not their natural persona, maybe it's whether they want to be better. It's like parenting. None of us want to be a bad parenting. Some of us mess up sometimes. And it's like, how do we become better at that? And so we don't try and expose line managers, we try and support them. And I think that's a really critical part of it, because if you're going to use a top-down performance thing, you know, engagement is really a code word for productivity. And so the bargain was never reciprocal. It was like, what can we get more out of you? Whereas if you say you actually want to make a great job that you enjoy, suddenly the whole thing has shifted. The psychological contract, the reciprocity starts to be there. So you need to do that for your line managers as well. You know, these guys and girls are not in easy jobs managing people. It's not easy, you know, having people to do it. And so actually, how do you support them to do that? So we do that in a sort of, I don't know if any of you use HelloFresh or one of those delivery companies that deliver a meal, but, you know, and it really makes you feel a good cook, even though I'm not a good cook, because it's done all the, you know, so we try and do the same for the line manager, which is we say, you know, here are the things that have gone well for your team last week. Here are the ones that aren't. Have a conversation. We parcel that all up for them so that they can have a better conversation. And so the only thing you need to do as an organization is be a tiny bit prescriptive that teams need to do it, and they need to talk half an hour each week, and teams will self-organize, because what will happen is, even if the team leader isn't the best people person, nearly every team's got a people person in them, and they will just start slightly facilitating those conversations because it's what they want to do. And so you'll allow situational leadership to emerge in that team. And so that I think is the trick to how you do it. And it's a process, you know, it's a 1% a week process, but it builds, and and to be honest, people are thirsty for these conversations. They do want to, everyone wants to talk about their experiences. The most important thing to me is my experience. I mean, you know, I should be brilliant at worrying about everyone's, but of course my experience is top trumps for me. So therefore, everybody wants to talk about it, and it's about how you do that in a way that's constructive, that builds, that get to know each other and trust each other more. Because, you know, that is, I mean, you must know it, Kerri, that when teams go well, some of them go really well, and it's how do you support them to do that?
I think that's right. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people, especially as we start to sort of tentatively look up and out to the future, and sort of saying to people what's been really good for you in the last 12 months. Also, you know, asking around what feedback, what advice would you give your manager for the next 12 months? And almost consistently, and this is not scientific, Nick, I'm sorry, this is what I've heard, but almost consistently people were saying we loved the weekly huddle. There was no agenda, there was no that got us through, that cup of tea together. And then advice to leaders, you keep that going, that 15 minutes a week. And that I think there's going to be a real need to consider connection as we move over the next phase. You know, we've been pretty isolated, you know, albeit connecting virtually, but physically isolated from each other. And so that sort of drive to connection is going to be really, really key. And it's the regularity seems to make a big difference, but also that slightly unstructured time to just show up and just share where you're at. It has come through as a really common experience for people of actually, this is what's helped me get through this period that we've been in. And it sort of takes you back. I mean, I spoke to my 6-year-old this morning. I said to her, I'm doing, you know, this, and she was like, what's the topic? And I said, it's happiness. And I said, are you happy? And she went, yeah, I'm really happy, mummy. And the ease with which she could ask and answer that question. But it's really interesting for adults. That's not always an easy answer. You know, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, actually, am I happy? Like, you know, I haven't thought about that for a while. I've been, you know, and I just think that there is, I know we're all sort of proponents of happiness here. There isn't someone who's sort of not saying that this is an important part of how we move forward, but there is a real humanness to happiness, and I think, you know, that I really like, because I think this is what should characterize what we start to think about, particularly as we move forward. But it's you know, I do think, Nick, you're right about the regularity of the conversations. The danger we had with the old surveying sort of practices is they were just annual, once a year, you know, and it sort of seems really it kind of puts people in the same category as the spreadsheet or the balance sheet when you're asking once a year only. And it might be suitable for a few measures, but I think, you know, engagement does move around, and driving that forward more regularly is something we've certainly started to look at. We're not doing weekly pulses at the moment, but you've given us some good food for thought here, Nick.
Nick will be emailing you afterwards. Don't worry. He's all over that. Brilliant. Well, I think, you know, to summarize what I've heard today, I mean, one of the things that I think has come through loud and clear is the importance of the manager and the conversation that they have with their team. And whether you're tracking happiness or engagement on a regular basis, you know, really the influence that a manager has on ensuring that people feel psychologically safe and able to come up and bring their whole selves to work definitely was a big theme. I loved what Nic said about the honest response needed, you know, when you start using these indicators, and the influence on the culture, you know, and that's where the kind of the magic happens for people. And also just that, you know, the language around happiness, that we have to just think more about what happiness is. It's curiosity, it's awe, it's inspiration, it's all those good things that we want people to be doing. Just final couple of sound bites, I guess, from everybody. I'd love to just come to you for your final thoughts. So first of all, Kerri, a final thought from you.
A final thought from me is, you know, happiness is Oh, Nic, you do your final thought and then you come back to me. I'm no rubbish at this sort of thing.
I'll finish the sentence for you. Happiness is a serious business, and businesses should take it seriously. And it's very dynamic, so you need to measure it dynamically. I think if you're going to manage something, however you need to measure it. I think it makes a great people KPI. Just released a white paper called Happiness KPI. It's on our website, fridaypulse.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn very easily. Nic Marks, no K. I respond to things on there and I write on there. But it's a serious thing and it needs to be taken seriously. And it is where the magic is. I think I'm an alchemist, really, trying to turn lead into gold. And I think, you know, we can really help people be better with just simple things that help them improve team happiness. And teams is very the heart of it, and leadership's very much important in that.
Lovely, thanks, Nic. Kerri, final thought from you?
I've thought of one now. Sorry for being a bit slow, but I think, you know, my final thought is don't be afraid to be happy.
Nice.
Love it.
Love that.
And Celine, how about yourself?
I think the key takeaway for me from this conversation is this idea of, which I've always loved, this idea of someone being a holistic person that has a life out, you know, within work, outside of work, everything is interchangeable. And let's start looking at the whole person and celebrating and loving that one person that we have within an organisation. That was really powerful for me. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And a massive thank you to Kerri and Nic for joining us today. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Our episode is a bit later in 2 weeks' time because we've got a guest from California. So we'll be going live at 3:30 UK time. The focus in 2 weeks' time will be on leaders in tech. So we have someone joining us from Silicon Valley and someone in the UK. So we will see you then.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.